Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to another session. Today we're going to be looking at the prostration of forgetfulness. Now the prostration of forgetfulness is done if a wajib action is missed. It's not done if you've missed an integral of fard action that necessitates that you make the prayer again. And it's not done if you miss a sunnah also. It's done if you miss a wajib action. So if one leaves, our author says, if one leaves one or more wajibs of the prayer out of forgetfulness or while not paying attention, it is wajib to perform 2 extra prostrations along with an extra tashahhud and 2 salams at the end of the prayer. So even if you were to make more than one mistake that necessitated the prostration of recital, you'd only make one. So if you broke a few wajibs in the prayer, you'd only make one prostration of recital at the end. How would you do this? On your last tashahhud, in your last sitting, you read at-tahiyyatu lillahi was-salawatu wa-tayyibatu to its end. You give one salam and then you bow, subhana rabbiyal a'la, 3 times, sit, bow again, and then your final sitting, you read the tashahhud again, and then you read the supplications, salawat, and then you give your salams. This is the prostration of recital. If you prayed behind an imam and the imam made a mistake, then he would correct that at the end by doing the prostration of recital. You would do it behind him, and then if you came late and you needed to carry on your own prayer, there were cycles that you missed, and if you made a mistake in any of those cycles, then you yourself again would make the prostration of recital by yourself for the mistakes that you made. It is sunnah to perform them after the first salam at the end of the prayer. Accordingly, it is disliked to perform them before the salam. So the sunnah is that you give the salam and then you go into prostration. If however you read the tashahhud and then went into the prostration, it would be valid, but the sunnah method is to give salam before. It's disliked to do it without giving the salam. The 2 prostrations are no longer wajib if the time enters in which prayers are disliked, such as the changing of the sun after Asr, or if the time expires such that the prayer is broken, such as the sunrise for Fajr. So what the author means here is the 2 disliked times are when the sun gets so low in the sky that you can see it without fear for your eyes, and then the time for Fajr, the end time for Fajr. At this point, if you were praying late to start with, and you made a mistake in your prayer and you got to the end, and now you would have given your salams in your regular prayer, and if you would not have given your salams now, you would have gone into the time that's disliked. In this instance, if you've made a mistake in your prayer and you need to do the prostration of recital, you wouldn't do it, you would just give your salams and it's done. Also for the Fajr, what the author means here is that if you leave Fajr so late that you're praying Fajr, and then you're on the last couple of seconds. In this instance, again, if you made a mistake, then that would mean, if you were to do the prostration of recital, that means that you would go over into a time where now your prayers become invalid because the time for Fajr finished and you went over the mark. So in this instance, again, you wouldn't do it. If one thinks he has finished a 4-unit prayer and then realizes he has only prayed 2 units, he would stand and complete the remaining 2 units and then perform the 2 prostrations. If one joins his prayer, it is valid. So if one thinks that he finished a 4-unit cycle, but he only prayed 2 units, so in the second sitting he's read to the end and then he realizes that he made a mistake and he actually needs another 2 cycles. In this instance, he would stand up, he would pray what he needs to pray, the other 2 cycles, and then he would sit down, tashahhud, make the prostration of recital, and then complete the ending again, and then do his salams. If somebody joins at this stage, there's no problem. The other person's prayer is valid because in this instance, you corrected your prayer, so the one praying behind you, his prayer is sound as well. If one begins to rise for the 3rd unit and then realizes that he did not perform the first sitting, after the 2nd unit, he should return to the sitting position if he's closer. So if somebody was doing a 4-unit cycle and in the 2nd unit where it's wajib to sit and he didn't sit and he rose, in this instance, when he rises, if he's closer to the ground, and then he sits down again and then does his 2nd sitting and then then gets up and completes the rest of his prayer. If he's closer to standing, then he stays standing. Now, what is standing and what is sitting? If your knees are straight, then you're obviously closer to standing. If your knees are still bent, so you're getting off the ground and your knees are still bent, it's considered that you are closer to sitting. In that instance, you'd sit. He should return to the sitting position if he's closer to the sitting position. If, however, he's closer to the standing position, then when he recalls, he should continue in the prayer and then perform Sujud Sahw. So at the end of the 4 cycles, he performs, as mentioned, the prostration of forgetfulness, and then his prayer is complete. The same ruling applies to the final sitting, i.e. he should return to it as long as he has not prostrated. If, however, he performed the sujood in the 5th unit that he mistakenly added, his fard prayer is invalidated. So what this means is, if in the 4th cycle, if somebody prays the 4 cycle prayer, and then in the 4th cycle, at the end of the prayer, he doesn't realize that he's actually ended the prayer and he gets up for a 5th cycle. If in this instance his prayer has been done now, right? So if he gets up for a 5th cycle, he does the tashahhud, and instead of finishing the prayer, he gets up. In this instance, his prayer was done, so then he just sits down again. Regardless, when he remembers, he sits down again, and then he stays sitting for a while and then just gives the salam. But if he happens to stand for the 5th cycle and he doesn't sit down, and then he ends up prostrating, what he's done now is he's invalidated his prayer. And the ulama say that then you do another cycle. So you do the 5th cycle, you stand up for a 6th cycle, you add another cycle to it, and it becomes like a nafil prayer. So his prayers become invalidated. He needs to do that prayer again, and then he's made the extra 2 cycles into a nawafila, and he does the prostration of forgetfulness, and then prays his real prayer again. If a person sits the final sitting and then gets confused and stands for the 5th cycle, then what? So in this instance, if somebody has sat down and he's completed his prayer, and then he gets confused. So he thinks that he still has another 2 cycles. But what he's done now is he stood up for the 5th cycle. So in this instance, what does he do? His prayer is valid, as all he does is he sits again to the ground and then gives the salam. So in this instance, his prayer is valid because he finished his prayer. So all he does is he sits down again. He sits down for a while, doesn't say anything because he's recited everything. He just gives the salam and his prayer is done. If the person did not return and prostrated for the 5th cycle, then he has completed his prayer and now he has started a new recommended prayer. So what he's done is, if he stands up for the 5th cycle, his prayer was technically complete, right? His prayer was technically complete. He ended up standing up for the 5th cycle. If he didn't sit down, then what he's done is he's made a 5th cycle for himself, and then he needs to add another cycle to that, and then he does the 6th cycle, and then he does the prayer for the prostration, and then he's okay. If one needed to perform the prostration of recital in the prayer, but rather said salam, after which another person joined the prayer, then the followers joining will be valid only if the original person praying performs Sujud Sahw. So in this instance, the author is saying is, you have a person, he's done his complete prayer, right? He's done his complete prayer. He had to make the prostration of recital. He had to make the prostration of recital, but he didn't do that. Instead, he says salam and says salam. In this instance, what happens? He had to make the prostration of recital, but he didn't do it. In this instance, what we say is his prayers become suspended. It's not invalidated as of yet. It depends on what he does now. If he gets up and walks away, then he needs to do his prayer again. It's severely deficient, it's unsound, he needs to make the prayer up again, and it's sinful. If he realizes his mistake, right, and then what he does is he just does the prostration of recital. So he reads the tashahhud again and does the prostration of recital, and then carries on with the prayer and then gives these salams, then everything is fine. Because potentially he didn't leave the prayer. The salam is like another supplication within the prayer, right? So he technically has not left the prayer yet, he's not made another move. That salam is added into the prayer, and all he does is he does the prostration of recital. And if someone joins at that point, then it's fine, there's no problem with his prayer. If someone joined at the end of when he said salam, at that point if someone joined, if the person made the prostration of forgetfulness, so he read the tashahhud then made the prostration of forgetfulness, then the other person's prayer is sound as well. If one does not frequently have doubts about how many units were performed in his prayer, then a doubt in the prayer would invalidate it. So what the author is saying here is, if you're someone who prays and you've never had a doubt, and you get a doubt one time in your life, so you get a doubt whether it's 3 cycles, I prayed 2 cycles, did I pray 4 cycles? In this instance, if it's the first time in your life, then you break your prayer and you make a new prayer free of doubts. Some ulama say that a doubt here would be like a frequent. Not frequently means that in a year, if you get it twice in a year, right, and then you didn't get it for a few years, and then if you got it again, then that's like you never had a doubt, right? So then you got a doubt after a lapse of a few years. In this instance, it's like having a doubt once, and then you break your prayer, and then you make a sound prayer where free of doubts. So if, however, it is frequent, he should make an educated guess and adhere to it. So if you're someone who frequently gets waswas, who frequently loses track of how many rakahs is prayed, then you make an educated guess, right? And whatever that guess is, you go by whatever feeling you have, and then you carry on completing your prayer. So then our author says, if he is unable to estimate, he should assume the lower number, sit after every unit and perform sajda sahw. So what the author is saying here is, if you're totally clueless and you don't know what cycle you're on, you go back to the number you do know. So the least of your cycles that you remember is in a 4-cycle prayer. You don't know if this is your 3rd cycle you completed, and you should be starting your 4th, but you do know that you completed 2 cycles. So in this instance, you'd go back to your lowest number, and then in every unit after that, you'd pray, you'd sit down and do tashahhud and then stand. Why? Because in reality, maybe you forgot, but you did pray that cycle. So then in the next cycle, you would have sat, right? And then so every cycle, so whether it's your 3rd cycle or whether it's your 4th cycle, you would sit in all the cycles and do tashahhud and then stand. Why? Because just in case it was your it was a cycle above the cycle you were on. Now here are some examples of where prostration of forgetfulness is mandatory. So performing an extra integral of prayer, reciting a verse of the Quran while bowing, standing, after sitting, and prostration. Forgetting to recite the Fatiha or 3 verses after Fatiha, failing to rise after tashahhud. For the Imam, if he recited a verse loud when he should not have, less than one verse is excused. So if the Imam recites less than 1 verse and then he remembers, that's excused. To remain silent in prayer, thinking. If you're thinking for a long time in prayer, such as a person can say Subhanallah 3 times, then again it becomes problematic. You have to do sajda sahw. If you're confused, if you don't realize how many rakahs you've done, or you get sidetracked, you just get confused. You can't stop. You've got a very small amount of time that you need to carry on praying. However, if you recite Quran in that duration, then it's okay. Personal mistakes in a congregational prayer are overlooked. So if you pray behind the Imam, if his prayer is valid, your prayer is valid. Any mistakes that you made in the prayer are overlooked. Your prayer goes by his prayer. If he makes a mistake, then he's going to correct that. You join him. Even if you join the prayer late and you were not part of that mistake, if he made that mistake, you would join him still. And if you did that and then you made your own mistake after the prayer is finished, then obviously you would do it a second time for your own mistake as well. So that's it. Thank you very much.